My name is Ben Bjarnason and I'm the founder and managing director of the LGBTIQ Domestic Violence Awareness Foundation, which is based in Australia. Today I'll be talking to you about domestic violence, or DV, which is a term that we use in Australia, but in other countries it might be known as domestic abuse, intimate partner abuse, intimate partner violence, or family violence. I'm a big 6'3" police officer. Most people wouldn't look at me and think that I could be a victim of domestic violence. I didn't think I could be either, yet here I am as proof that domestic violence can happen to anyone. I felt ashamed, I felt invisible, and I felt stupid that I'd ended up in this position. I now know that domestic violence can happen to anyone. It doesn't matter what your job is, how much money you earn, your sexuality, gender identity, religion or cultural background. Domestic violence is here and it's harming our very own LGBTQ friends, family members and work colleagues every day. As many as 1 in 2 LGBTQ people will be in a violent or abusive relationship at some time in their life. 1 in 2. Yet despite these incredibly alarming figures, there's still a massive lack of awareness about this issue. For me, I felt helpless. I had no idea what to do or where to go for support. I really just fumbled through on my own. Domestic violence in LGBTQ relationships is commonly not identified or seen as abuse, and there's an enormous gap in support services available. LGBTQ people are the invisible victims of domestic violence who are too often overlooked when it comes to prevention initiatives, support services and awareness campaigns. This means they may not even realise that DV can affect them in their relationships. As a result, they don't get the support they need and remain at a greater risk of abuse and harm. I know I was ashamed to talk to anyone about it. I thought people would judge me and I wasn't sure if I'd be believed or taken seriously. On the surface and on social media, my relationship looked great. My partner and I lived in a lovely house. We had a beautiful German Shepherd called Zulu. We went away on holidays together and nights out on the town, yet beneath the surface, it was a relationship that was based on power and control. I was forever worrying about when his next outburst of anger would be and what the next outburst would bring. Would he embarrass me in front of friends or family? Would he abuse me, damage property, assault me, or would next time be something worse? The abuse started quite earlier in the relationship. He would get jealous if I spoke to anyone who he didn't know. Something as simple as saying hello to a childhood friend at an event could spark this fit of rage that at times ended with him pushing me or throwing things at me. He would blame his behaviour on being drunk, on mental health issues, or being scared of losing me. He'd say things like, "I love you so much, it makes me crazy." Rather than seeing these behaviours as red flags, I thought to myself, wow, he must really love me if he's this concerned about losing me. There was always a build-up of tension where I'd find myself walking on eggshells and avoiding anything that I thought could cause him to go off. After a while, I knew what might set him off and when the next outburst was coming. Sometimes it would be because I went out for dinner with my work colleagues without him. At times it was for something as simple as trying to hold his hand, getting home from work late, or even what I'd cook for dinner. As a precaution for these impending outbursts of anger, at times I'd prepare the house to help ensure my safety. I would hide the knife block in the kitchen, have the front door open, put the car keys in the ignition and have the garage door up ready for a quick escape if I needed it. What I was experiencing made me feel terrible, but I always had this nagging doubt about whether it was abuse. Could I be a victim of abuse? Or was I just being too sensitive? Or is this what it's like to be in a same-sex relationship? Or is it because he had a tough childhood? I was confused because as a gay man, I didn't associate myself with someone who could be a victim of DV. One time I recall, I just wanted him to punch me in the face, so I had a clear indicator that it was domestic violence and a specific reason to leave him. Despite this, I still wasn't recognising what I was experiencing as domestic violence. Every time he used violence or abuse, next came the apologies, the promises to change, and these grand gestures to prove how much he loved me. It ranged from promises to drink less, to see a psychologist, to commitment rings, promises to marry, and even a tattoo of my name on his chest. I saw it all. What I didn't see was a way out. My view of DV was it was something that was only committed by a man against a woman. I was a big, tough police officer. I felt so ashamed. How could I be a victim? I was well educated, I had a good job, and I'm male. What would people say? Would I be seen as weak and just told to man up? What I now know is that while DV and heterosexual relationships and LGBTQ relationships share many similarities, there are also several unique methods of using power and control. These can include threats to out or reveal their partner's sexuality, gender identity or health status to family, friend or work colleagues, pressure to conform to certain gender or sexuality stereotypes, ridiculing the other person's expression of sexuality or gender, or isolation from LGBTQ friends, venues and events. When I searched for support services, I only found services for men using violence against women. This reinforced the belief that I couldn't be a victim. It wasn't until I stumbled upon a LGBTQ DV website and found a relationship checklist and ticked nearly every box that I realised what I was experiencing was DV. When we look at support services advertising, government campaigns or news articles, they most often speak about domestic violence victims being women and children. I found this was an international trend when I travelled the globe as part of a Churchill Fellowship. Over 6 weeks, I visited 6 countries, 8 police departments and 15 support organisations investigating methods for police to enhance the way that they respond to DV in LGBTQ communities. Studies have shown that LGBTQ people are far less willing to reach out to police or support services. Alarmingly, one study indicated that only 1 in 20 people who had experienced domestic violence had actually reported the violence or abuse to police. These low reporting figures to police can be attributed not only to the lack of awareness of DV and LGBTQ relationships, but also due to the historically negative and challenging relationships between police and LGBTQ communities. It was only in 1992 that the World Health Organization removed homosexuality from its list of mental disorders, and it wasn't until 1997 that every state in Australia had decriminalised homosexuality. These historical incidents of police targeting LGBTQ people whilst enforcing those laws of the day can still lead some LGBTQ people to distrust police and fear that they won't be treated appropriately. These days, however, thankfully, relationships between police and LGBTQ communities are generally quite positive. Victims of DV and LGBTQ relationships also face challenges when accessing support services, as the DV sector is generally funded and operates under quite a gendered framework which doesn't necessarily meet the needs of LGBTQ communities. Crisis accommodation, perpetrator behavioural change programs and court safe rooms are all designed to protect heterosexual women. As a result, LGBTQ people don't receive the protection or support that they need. In most states in Australia, housing is only available for women, which means male victims, no matter what their sexuality is, may have no other option than to access homeless services. While support services continue to provide assistance to people based on their gender and sexuality, LGBTQ people will remain at a greater risk of failing to engage with the services and police. This is going to leave them at a higher risk of abuse and violence without that early identification and intervention. We cannot rely solely on government departments, police and support services if we're going to solve this problem. We all have a responsibility as individuals to do something if we're going to end domestic violence in our communities. It's quite common for incidents of abuse to be witnessed by others, with research indicating that up to 1 in 3 DV incidents are observed by a bystander. Despite this, most people aren't aware of what behaviours constitute domestic violence or what they can do to help. That's why I ask, when you go home today, make yourself aware of what a healthy relationship looks like and what the signs of an abusive one might be. Understand what you can do if you think someone you know is experiencing domestic violence. Would you know what to do if your friend or family member's partner displayed abusive behaviours? Do you know what you could do if they were putting your friend down in front of you, checking up on them all the time, or becoming jealous or controlling? There are many resources available, such as bystander toolkits and relationship checklists. These resources can help give you the confidence that you need to assist someone in an abusive relationship. By showing your support, you could change their life in ways you can't even imagine. You could even save one. We need to challenge our beliefs and the way that we talk about domestic violence and work together as a community to ensure that in the future there are no invisible victims. Everyone, no matter what their gender or sexuality, should feel seen, believed, supported, valued, and be given hope. This will assist them in having the courage to reach out for support if they need it. Domestic violence isn't just a heterosexual issue, it's a human issue. And the sooner we acknowledge it can affect anyone, the sooner we can work towards ending it. As I've been saying, traditionally when people think about domestic violence, they automatically think of a heterosexual male perpetrating violence against a heterosexual female. If you were to search Google for the term domestic violence, you'll most likely be presented with information or support for female victims or support for male perpetrators, and images like this. As a result, LGBTQ people aren't likely to see themselves as experiencing abuse or being an abuser if they can't identify with those portrayed characteristics of domestic violence within the public eye. I'll now run you through a thing called the Stroop Test. It'll give you an idea of how hard it is to modify ingrained associations between two concepts or our implicit biases. So with me, wherever you are, I want you to say the words or font colours going from top to bottom as quickly as you can. Red, green, yellow, brown, blue, purple, yellow, purple, pink, blue, red, green, brown. So as you can see, the first slide demonstrates the ease that we can do the tasks that are in agreement with our associations. Now this time I want you to say the font colours out loud and not the words. So with me, as quickly as you can again, purple, blue, pink, yellow, brown, green, red, brown, green, red, pink, yellow, purple, blue. It demonstrates how hard it is to do the things that require us to do differing tasks. Our brains really fight us each step of the way. The most common association with the term domestic violence is physical violence which is perpetrated by a male against a female. And this association can contribute to the belief that domestic violence is a heterosexual problem which rarely affects LGBTQ communities. It's been found that the true nature and extent of DV suffered by LGBTQ people remains largely hidden, as very little data and research exists on the prevalence of DV experienced by people that identify as LGBTQ. While focus on the issue is growing, there's a general acknowledgement that this violence is largely underreported, under-researched and under-responded. A 2019 Western Sydney University study found that LGBTQ people suffer from significantly higher rates of domestic violence in their relationships, being up to 62% when compared to heterosexual relationships. When it comes to reporting the abuse, 35% of participants discussed it with a friend or neighbour, 18% with a counsellor or psychologist, 17% with a family member, and only 5.3% reporting to police. Just because incidents of DV involving LGBTQ people aren't being reported doesn't mean they're not happening. It could just mean no one knows about them or victims aren't confident in reporting them. It's not until the community are confident in the police and support services that they will report DV or seek assistance. Therefore, the more confident LGBTQ communities are in support services and the police, the more reporting there will be of incidents. Some of the myths we hear regularly can also lead LGBTQ people to not receive the support that they need or identify the abuse in their own relationships. Things like domestic violence is only a straight issue and doesn't often occur in LGBTQ relationships. Or it's not really domestic violence when two gay men fight, it's just boys being boys and a man should be able to defend himself. Or violence in lesbian relationships is just a catfight. Or incidents of violence in LGBTQ relationships are less severe than when it happens in straight relationships. The more masculine, bigger or stronger partner is typically the abuser. Or it's easier for LGBTQ people to leave relationships than it is for their straight or married counterparts. Another one we hear often, violence in LGBTQ relationships is just a mutual fight, or same-sex couples are equal and therefore can't be victims. As I said earlier, it wasn't until I completed the relationship checklist and really came to terms with the fact that I was in an abusive relationship. It's a really valuable tool, and I'd encourage you to tell your friends or family members to use it, and that can assist them in identifying unhealthy traits in their relationships. You can complete a quiz on healthy relationships by visiting the help and support section on our website, which I'll share at the end of this presentation. When looking at this list, you can use it to check on your own relationship. You can also take into consideration your friends or your family. So when we look at the different unhealthy behaviours, some of them are your partner treats you like a possession or becomes jealous or controlling for no reason. So I know for me, the very first incident of abuse that I can recall was when my ex became enraged for no reason because I'd spoken Danish to someone in line at McDonald's after a night out. He went off, threw property around the room, pushed me over and carried on, all because he was scared of losing me. Another one is isolation from friends and family. Things like your friends don't like me, your family don't like me, your family will never love you as much as I do, I'm all you need, let's just spend the night together, etc. and things like that. Your partner monitors your whereabouts. You receive constant phone calls or texts checking where you are, who you're with, when you'll be home, or monitoring things like Find My iPhone or installing tracking devices on cars and phones. They tell you how to dress or present and say you're too feminine, too masculine, you're too butch, or they don't like the clothes that you wear. Your partner constantly criticises or belittles you. I know for me I was always told I had bad skin, or I was too pale, or do you need to eat that, or you're dumb, you're trying to lose weight, you shouldn't eat as much as me, you need to go to the gym. They're common things we sort of hear of. You feel like you're walking on eggshells and avoiding any topic that you think could cause them to go off or start an argument. Your partner monitors finances, controls money, or gives you an allowance. They monitor your social media or your phone. And common things I've heard are, if you've got nothing to hide, then why don't you show me your phone? Why don't you give me your password? You must be hiding something if you don't give it to me. Other things like telling you who you can and can't follow or be friends with online, or asking you to delete other LGBTQ people from your socials. These threats of outing you as a way to control you, or threaten to have you deported or lose your current visa status. They can also threaten self-harm or suicide as a method of control, and that's one that we also see that's quite common. In a healthy relationship, on the other hand, you should feel safe, supported, appreciated and valued. You can be your true self. You know your partner has your true interests at heart. You feel free to share your opinions, you feel respected, you're equal in your relationship, and you feel free to make your own choices. The cycle of violence is used to understand abusive relationships and help people understand both why a person stays in an abusive relationship and also why an abuser seems to dramatically change their personality. The cycle of violence goes through many stages, and many survivors can relate to it. However, it's important to note that the experience of violence is not the same for everyone, and there's no telling how long each phase will last for. It could be moments, days, months, or years. The cycle tends to get quicker over time, and often the pursuit phase or the pleasant phase can be skipped. In some cases, leaving a relationship can be one of the most dangerous times, and it can be important to be prepared. The Friends and Family Toolkit is a great resource for identifying and supporting a friend or family member in an abusive relationship. It is important that a person experiencing violence has a safety plan if they're at risk of danger. As we talk about these sections, I'll give you some examples of my own relationship for some context. First, we've got the pursuit phase, where the person is making you feel special, buying you presents, making love, having sex. I know in my relationship there are things like buying commitment rings, promising to marry me, the tattoo of my name on his chest, romantic dinners, holidays away together, or inviting my friends around for drinks or dinner. Then we've got the pleasant phase. The relationship continues as normal and there's not really any issues. We go to the tension phase, where you feel like you're walking on eggshells and you start to change your behaviour to prevent an explosion. For me, it was things like avoiding going out with friends, or texting him updates about where I was, who I was with, or not going to a party if he'd asked me not to, just to avoid a fight, or changing what I was wearing to make him happy, or even not following certain people on Instagram. We look at the abusive phase. So the abuse could be physical, emotional, sexual, intimidation, or all of the above. For me, I experienced all of these, but it was always followed by the remorse phase in the following days. So with the remorse phase, the abuser might deny or minimise the abuse, or justify it by blaming your behaviour or other stresses. They might feel guilty or say sorry and that it will never happen again. Things like, I love you so much, it makes me crazy. I can't imagine my life without you. I'm stressed at work, you're too sensitive. I had an abusive childhood, or, I'll start seeing a psychologist, I'll start taking my medication, I'll drink less, I'll stop taking drugs, or comments like, everyone fights. This is what LGBTQ relationships are like. Then we go back to the pursuit phase. Things are great, they change their behaviour, they're seeing a psychologist, they're not drinking, they're being super sweet to you. You're seeing the good side of them again, and you've got real hope for the relationship again. And you feel good about yourself, and then suddenly you find yourself saying, they've changed now, I'll give them another chance. I don't need to leave them anymore. It can't be abuse, they're being so good to me. Then on to the pleasant phase, and around we go again. So LGBTQ people may be hesitant in accessing support services or reporting DV to police because they don't believe that the support is available to them. They believe they won't be taken seriously or believed by police or treated appropriately and respectfully. There might also be a fear that their gender identity or sexuality could be exposed to their friends, family or work colleagues. They may believe that police or support services won't be able to look past their gender identity or sexuality and see them as a victim. They feel embarrassed, ashamed or scared. LGBTQ people don't want to come out or identify themselves as being LGBTQ to police or support services unless they're sure that they will be recognised and acknowledged. There is a fear of discrimination from police and support services if there is no specific advertising advising that their organisation is a safe place for LGBTQ people. In some cases, the stress of reporting abuse is greater than the abuse itself. There's one person I spoke to in New York City who said that they would rather risk getting stabbed by their partner than to report the abuse to police. So that just shows how incredibly daunting it can be for people to report that abuse. Victims have already experienced a traumatic event, and some aren't willing to go through another one by reporting to police or services or going through that criminal justice system. And some victims are aware that there are no specific support agencies for LGBTQ victims and therefore don't report the abuse, knowing that they might not be properly supported. And some of those myths and stereotypes we spoke about earlier can also make it more difficult for victims of DV to come forward to those service providers and police. You might be wondering what you can do to help. Friends, family members and workplaces play a huge role in preventing and responding to domestic violence by being prepared for when, not if, one of their friends, family members or staff members are affected by abuse. Most importantly, a friend or family member or colleague needs your support. Even if there's no immediate change, your support may help them to consider their options and ultimately ensure their safety. Discussions about DV can be difficult. A controlling partner often blames the victim for the violence, so an abused person might be afraid of being judged and sometimes can be defensive. Let them know that DV can happen in LGBTQ relationships too, and let them know that the perpetrator's behaviour is not their fault. The perpetrator and the perpetrator only are the ones responsible for their behaviour. Let them know that there are LGBTQ and LGBTQ aware support services available. Make them aware of resources such as the relationship checklist. Like I said earlier, doing this checklist was a real light bulb moment for me. For more information on domestic violence and abuse in LGBTQ communities, please head to the LGBTQ Domestic Violence Awareness Foundation webpage, where you'll find lots of further information and resources in our help and support section. This includes the relationship checklist, resources for friends, family and work colleagues, as well as a safety planning tool and more. Please feel free to get in touch with me, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions, and I look forward to catching up with you all in the live session shortly.